Hello. So, in this Career Conversations show, today I have the pleasure of hosting Professor Himanshu Rai, the Director of IIM Indore. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you so much, Anurag.
The objective why I wanted to bring you on the show was that the IIMs remains a storied world, a world of fantasy beyond the reach of a lot of average students in the commerce realm, who are the primary audiences of this channel. So I wanted to showcase to them that the professors of IIMs are so humble that they are willing to come on a show and share their discourse on management. And this, I'm sure, is going to inspire a lot of people to actually take the CAT and probably the GMAT for the 1-year course and try to fulfill their management education aspirations.
Certainly, I mean it's always a pleasure to be on such a show, and it's strange that you mentioned the part about humility, because I think by very virtue of being a faculty, you have to be humble. So to me, education is all about humility. I mean, if education is not making you humble, then it is something else, and it's not education. So by default, all the faculty must necessarily be humble.
Yes, sir, absolutely. And I have experienced it during my IIM Ahmedabad 1 year. But for the world outside, this is like a storied world where it's fantasy, management consulting, investment banking, and maybe it's beyond the reach of the. So, sir, to jump straight away into the question. So, before I plunge into the professional part of your journey, can you please tell us about your formative years in Kanpur, the values that you learned from your parents, your siblings, those fond memories of childhood which one would always want to share, because I'm not sure whether it's anywhere on the internet as of now.
Yeah, I guess not much about my formative years out there, but I was born and brought up in Kanpur, and I was born to a family where my father was the first person to actually come out of his village and come to the city to work. And he started with the ordnance factory. He started his career with the ordnance factories. And when he married my mother was 16 and a half, and she was 17 and a half when she had me. So she had just finished 12th when she got married, and she was in BA Part 1 when she had me. And thereafter, she went on to do her BA, BEd, MA, MEd, PhD, DLit. So in many ways, my mother and I, we studied together. And that's one of the reasons why I am also interested in Sanskrit literature, because my mother is a Sanskrit professor. So she did her PhD in Sanskrit drama and a DLit in Dharma Shastra, the Vedas. And therefore, right from my childhood, that had a huge impact on me. So number one, the impact that I had was that our house just had books all over. So there were all kinds of books, but predominantly it was Sanskrit literature. So I grew up reading Sanskrit literature. And because my parents were not very comfortable with the English language, they wanted their firstborn, which is me, to be very conversant with English and speak English very well. So I still remember my father had kept a British tutor to teach me spoken English. And he says that he used to pay her 1/4 of his salary. And therefore I learned English and Sanskrit as my first languages. And subsequently, of course, I spoke Hindi, because that was a common tongue in the family. And then Bhojpuri from my father's side and Punjabi from my mother's side. So I ended up with these languages. But my formative years in my school, so I have studied in 3 schools before I went for my engineering. So my formative years were in a convent where I studied for a few years, and then that convent decided to turn itself into a girls' school. So I went to another school in Kanpur called Jaipuriya, which gave me a lot of rooting in multiple activities. That's where my interest in things like dramatics started. My first school gave me my roots in debates and extemporaries, and I used to do that on a pretty regular basis. My second school gave me my roots in dramatics and theater. And then for my 11th and 12th, I went to Central School because I shifted to a CBSE board since I wanted to prepare for my engineering. But I have extremely fond memories of all the 3 schools, and indeed my formative years in Kanpur. I haven't been able to go back to Kanpur as much as I wish to now, though my parents are still settled there. But I do have good memories.
So, sir, then from Sanskrit the world of literature, what prompted your interest in science so that you landed up in NIT Suratkal doing your engineering?
So Sanskrit literature was something that I loved over and beyond my academic part. And my fascination, I used to love physics. So my favorite subject growing up, even in terms of the sciences, was physics. And because I wanted to understand physics well, it was also mathematics that I really loved, especially the logic part of mathematics. In fact, when I was in class 11th, that is when our school got a telescope, and it bought a telescope, and my physics teacher and I, the two of us were the only ones who used to actually use that telescope to look at some of the planets and the rings around the Saturn and so on and so forth. And my first teacher who had a lot of impact on me was also my physics teacher in class 11th and 12th, Mr. A.K. Katiyar. And because of him, I got fascinated with physics all the more. And we used to love solving problems in physics, so much so that I remember that many a times I would go over to his place and we would try to solve a few problems. Sometimes we did not manage to solve those problems. There used to be this book called Resnick and Halliday, and there was another book called I.E. Irodove, and Irodove was far tougher than even Resnick and Halliday. I still remember that. And sometimes we wouldn't be able to solve those problems. And while I would be going back to my house, which was barely 200 meters away from his, I would suddenly hear him shout from his balcony, "Himanshu, just hang on. And he would come down because something would have occurred to him, and we would actually solve the problem while standing on the road. And so such was my love for physics. And in fact, at that point of time, I had thought of becoming a theoretical physicist. But when I told this to my parents, my dad laughed me out of that because he didn't know what theoretical physics really meant, and he wasn't even sure if theoretical physicists would ever get a job. The Big Bang Theory had not happened. So it wasn't known to people. It wasn't popular. And therefore, theoretical physics, my dad didn't see much future in there. And therefore, by default, what used to happen in those times was that if you were good in biology, your parents expected you to become a doctor. And if you were good in physics and maths, your parents expected you to be an engineer. So I became an engineer by default, not so much by choice. Or let's say, even if it was by choice, it was out of very limited choices that I was given. Be an engineer or a doctor. I didn't like biology. I love physics. And so therefore, I became an engineer.
Okay, that is actually the problem in the Indian society also. If you're science, it's doctor, engineer. If you're commerce, it's a chartered accountant. Some aspiring people will go for an MBA. So
absolutely. And by the way, so my younger brother, who's 6.5 years younger to me, he loved biology. So he became a doctor. And simply because that was the other choice which was given to him. And he continues to be a doctor, a medical practitioner.
Amazing. So then you spent like 9 years in Tata Steel before, you shifted into academics through the FPM route, and that would have been a major career transition. So Tata Steel IL5 officer was, I'm not, because I'm also ex-Tata Steel 2009 to 11, so I was an IL5 officer. So like, what was your experiences in Tata Steel, the 9 years, and then how this suddenly, was it like a sudden transition? Was it well thought of that, yes, eventually I want to get into academics, and hence the FPM program at IIM Ahmedabad?
So first of all, Tata Steel is an amazing company to work with. So I loved my 8.5 years in Tata Steel. I joined Tata Steel as a GT, as you already mentioned. And then I spent several years. And while I was working with Tata Steel, I also conducted about half a dozen plays. I staged half a dozen plays, directed and produced 2 documentary films, conducted about 50 odd quizzes across the country, similar number of antaksharis, despite the fact that I'm not a good singer. But what I used to lack in my singing skills, I used to make up for it with probably my sense of humor, which is still pretty twisted. And all of this I did, apart from, of course, making steel. So Tata Steel gave me that freedom to actually pursue my interests while I was also doing work for Tata Steel. So that was one of the great things. And Jamshedpur is an amazing place. So I have very amazing experiences, a lot of friends over there, and Jamshedpur still remembers me. So every time I go back to Jamshedpur, I am always received with a lot of warmth. So people have a big heart there, and they also have a very good memory because they continue to be my friends. What led to this transition was a particular incident which actually told me as to what is it that I really wanted to do with my life. So right from my early days, so as a GT, we had to necessarily do a trek. And I was fortunate enough that when I did my first trek, right after joining Tata Steel, I found my mountaineering guru, and I couldn't have asked for a better teacher to take me to the mountains, Bachendri Pal, who was the first Indian woman to climb Everest. So she happens to be my mountaineering guru. And of course, now she's a good friend of mine. And the moment I went to the Himalayas, I fell in love with the Himalayas. I thought that I belonged there. And I still consider Himalayas as my spiritual abode. And I keep telling people that, look, my name is Himanshu. I'm a part of the Himalayas. Himka Anshu mein. And this was, this was in about at 1998 when I was doing a trek, and I was sitting on the top of a Himalayan peak and reading a book. I'll not take you through the details of that story, but while reading that book, it suddenly struck me as to what did I really want to do with my life. And the moment that became clear to me, I came down and I started wondering and I started thinking, how do I get to my vision? How do I fulfill my vision? And I realized that an academic life would probably take me to my vision much faster than any other life. And that was the day when I decided to shift to academia. Wrote CAT. First of all, I found out as to what are the ways of doing a program such as this, how to go for higher education, what to really be studying, so on and so forth. Figured it out, wrote CAT, applied to IIM Ahmedabad only. Thankfully got in, because as soon as I got the CAT results and when I got the interview call from IIM Ahmedabad, I put in my papers at Tata Steel. And everybody around me was furious. They said, you need to wait till the results come out. But my whole point was that now that I've figured out what is it that I want to do with my life, I don't want to waste a single minute. And I was pretty sure at that point of time, I guess that bravado also comes from the kind of an age that I was in, that I thought I could conquer the world. But fortunately, I got through IIM Ahmedabad, and thus began my journey at IIM Ahmedabad.
So, in terms of IIM Ahmedabad, since it always gives you, the red bricks give you very fond memories, Louis Khan Plaza, RJM Auditorium, the professors. So, what would be your best takeaways from? And so it would be like 4-5 years on campus because of the FPM.
5 years, yeah.
5 years. So, yeah. So, sir, some best of your memories from IIM Ahmedabad.
I have some amazing memories of IIM Ahmedabad. Be they be about the kind of people that I met. So my batch, so my PGP batch was 2000, 2002, and we are still in close touch with each other. We are still in contact with each other, and we keep talking about those amazing days. I have some amazing memories when we used to make those group projects. And since I had brought in experience, I had industry experience of 8.5 years, my group mates looked up to me to come up with something special when it came to class discussions and all. And I know that many of you may already be aware that there's something called a challenge CP concept at IIM Ahmedabad, where you are supposed to bring in multiple elements that people challenge you to bring in a class participation. A lot of times it was expected of me to lead that challenge CP and bring in completely different perspectives into the classroom. From there to the kind of events that we used to have, the cultural events, I still remember I participated in the debate for the first time at IIM Ahmedabad, that is, when I participated for the first time at IIM Ahmedabad. I won the debate, and after that, the organizers, which were obviously my batchmates, they came to me and said, Baba, that was my college nickname, you're not going to be a participant from next time onwards, you're going to be a judge, because we need to give a fair chance to the other people. So all of that camaraderie, and of course, the Frisbee games at Louis Khan Plaza, we also had a dramatic team, and I still remember we put up a play which was with my PGP batch, and There Were None, which is an Agatha Christie play. and that got extremely good reviews. We put it up for 3 days in a row. So one for the outsiders, one for people inside, and one for the families within IIM Ahmedabad. So there are lots and lots of memories, both in terms of the faculty, the students, my batchmates, and the things that we did over there.
Just a minute. So then you landed up with those cherished FPM because now that time like PhD was not there because of the IIM Act prohibitions. You landed up as a professor, and between then and now, it's almost like 1.5 decades, and you've taught at like XLRI, and then IIM Lucknow, SDA Boconni, where you was the dean, and then IIM Indore. How have you seen management education evolve in the classroom in terms of the stakeholder expectations, the discussions? So at IIM Indore, how has this happened? And especially like HR is a subject, your core areas of interest, which I read online, is conflict management and negotiation. So sir, please tell us about that. And do you award marks for class participation to your students? Because
I used to award marks for class participation, but that depends on the subject. So I'll take you very quickly through my journey. So as soon as I finished my PhD at IIM Ahmedabad, the first institution that I joined was XLRI, because XLRI was the quickest one off the block to give me a job offer. The IIMs used to take a lot of time at that point of time. I think we still do. We take a lot of time in reverting to the candidates, responding to the candidates. And so I started my career with XLRI, and it's a brilliant place to start your career with for 2 reasons. One, I was back in Jamshedpur, which is where I was in my Tata Steel days. So I was going back to a very familiar place. And second, when it comes to HR, XLRI is probably one of the best institutions in the world to start your career in, because the kind of opportunities it gives you as a teacher and as a student, because you also learn from your peer group as well as from your own students. So I cut my teeth in the academic world at XLRI. And then when I shifted to IIM Lucknow, I think one of the differences between the 2 places was that XLRI is HR focus, one, but there is a lot of let's say camaraderie between the faculty and the students, which we do not find to that extent in the IIMs. In the IIMs, the relationship is still more formal, whereas in XLRI, it's more informal. So there used to be a lot of, for example, social events which the faculty and the students used to come together. The faculty used to participate in a lot of social events, even when they were student driven. And then third, the faculty at XLRI themselves used to organize a lot of social events for the groups in the campus. In fact, there was something called, if I recall correctly, XLRI Campus Club. And one fine day I was told that I have been elected as the president of the XLRI Campus Club. And I said, hey, hang on. I never participated in any elections. I never volunteered. I never gave my name. They said, that's not how it works. Basically, the community members, they decide who they want it to be. So they give votes. Whether you are interested or not, you have to take this up. But that was a kind of a very different kind of culture that we had at XLRI. And when you come to IIMs, it's more formal. Again, when you go to, when I went to Bocconi, for example, Bocconi has more of an informal culture because you have the Italian culture which is brought in. So there is much more closeness between the students and the faculty. And you don't have that sense of power distance, which we have both in our country as well as our education system itself. So for example, in Bocconi, nobody addressed me as sir. They would either call me Dean Rai or they would call me by my first name, and it was absolutely fine with me. I do understand that many people are not very comfortable. Many of my faculty colleagues are not very comfortable being addressed by the first names. But then I guess it's a matter of choice of the individuals, how they would be like to be addressed. I think everyone has the right to tell the rest of the world as to how would they like to be addressed. So one cannot sit and value judgment about which is right and which is wrong or which is good or which is bad. Be that as it may, this was a difference. So far as management, and IIM Indore, of course, here, what we are trying to do is we are trying to get some kind of a balance between this very formal structure and between informal structures, in the sense that I try and communicate with my students, with all the students of the institute, as often as I possibly can. I try to listen to them, and I make sure that whatever feedback, etc., that they have to give is actually taken very, very seriously, and changes are brought about in the system to address those feedbacks. So far as education is concerned, I think management education as such has evolved over a period of time. And I wouldn't say that it's different across different colleges, but I would say it's evolved over time. So it must have evolved across all the colleges that I've been a part of. And by that, what I mean is that earlier management education was very functional. So we spoke about, whenever we spoke about subjects, whenever we spoke about electives in particular, the first year where you have the core subjects is always very, very functional. So you will have necessarily marketing, OB, HR, operations, finance, accounting, so on and so forth, strategy, so on and so forth. But when it came to electives, I remember in the early days, so when I joined academia in 2005, even the electives were very, very functional. So you would have advanced finance or banking, investment banking, so on and so forth. Likewise, in HR, you would have performance appraisal, you would have team building, you would have subjects like hiring, recruitment and selection, training and development, so on and so forth. But there was no scope or experimentation which was done on what could possibly be useful for us to create leaders. So we were creating managers at that point of time. And over a period of time, what we have realized is that not only do we have to give functional education, but we also have to stimulate our students intellectually. Number one. Number two, our job is not just to create managers, but our job is to create responsible leaders. And therefore, even the kind of offerings which were out there have changed. So when the first elective, for example, when I joined IIM Lucknow, the first elective that I offered was negotiation, which wasn't there till that point of time. So it was the first time that somebody was offering a negotiation, although it's a skill-based course. The second elective that I offered there with another colleague of mine at IIM Lucknow was a subject called leadership through literature, where we picked up pieces of literature, and by analyzing each of those pieces, so we picked up 8 pieces of literature, 8 books of literature, and each book had a theme attached to it. So for example, let's say a book like Siddharth by Hermann Hesse would have the theme passion and compassion attached to it. A book like Mudra Rakshas, which is a play by Vishak Dutt narrating Chanakya's story and his annihilation of Nand Kings, would have the theme ends versus means attached to it. And thereby, by discussing these books and by going through the narrative through a certain framework, we would evolve frameworks of leadership and figure out as to how these themes are still relevant and how they need to be a part of the discourse of leadership. The third elective that I launched over there is called Justice, Ethics, and Morality, where we looked at the philosophy of fairness. And then the fourth elective that I launched was something called Fire, which is framing identities and roles through exploration, where we took students out of the campus, where they stayed for 3 days outside, and through conversations and through something which is called process work, we help them in realizing who they are, and more importantly, why they are whoever they are. And thus it was a journey to discovering your own self. Now, the whole point is that the acceptance of such courses, that has come over a period of time, because each of these courses has a very different set of pedagogical tools. So for example, when I teach negotiation, I use a lot of simulation. When I started in 2006, there were no such thing as simulations. There were no such thing as role plays which were used. At the most, exercise is something, but not really hardcore role plays. Likewise, when I talk about, say, justice, ethics, and morality, we use a lot of dialogue. So there are a lot of dialogues, there are a lot of debates. We divide the class into 2 groups. We ask people to defend whatever their viewpoint is, so on and so forth. So all of these pedagogical tools have actually got more acceptance over a period of time. And if your question on HR, once again, as I said, that HR earlier was concerned only about the functional elements of HR, like recruitment, selection, training, development, reward management, performance management, so on and so forth. But now, when we talk about HR, we think of HR in terms of something that drives leadership. And therefore, you will find many courses on leadership, many courses which I've got, many courses in communication, which are also becoming a part of HR. And likewise, some courses which actually help in the overall decision making and understanding of human beings for the people, rather than being limited to a particular function. So I think the management education has evolved both in terms of content, in terms of acceptance of the courses, and in terms of acceptance of newer pedagogical tools.